Lesson number 5, Introduction to Futures Pricing. And here what you will learn in this lesson, the non-arbitrage principle. That's just it. Futures pricing, some introductory notes. Previously, it has been stated that the price of the futures generally differs from the price of the underlying. It can be equal, higher or lower than the latter, depending on the physical characteristics of the underlying asset itself and the combined action of supply and demand. The price of the futures is determined on the basis of mathematical reasoning with a specific purpose, to eliminate any arbitrage opportunity. An arbitrage is defined as a transaction with a safe return and no risk. Such situations typically occur when the same product is listed on two different markets with two different prices. If an investor has access to both markets, and on these markets both buying and short selling transactions are allowed, then he can buy the good where it costs the least and sell it where it costs the most. When the two prices are realigned, he can close both positions with a certain profit. Just to say, the stock ST Microelectronics is listed both on the American Stock Exchange, on the New York Stock Exchange, and on the Milan Stock Exchange in Italy. And of course, on the New York Stock Exchange, it's listed in US dollars. On the Italian Stock Exchange, it's listed in euros. The two prices at any time should be equal, taking into consideration the exchange rate between euros and dollars, of course. If they are not, an arbitrage is possible. Let's assume that the exchange rate between euros and dollars is 1 to 1. And the price on the New York Stock Exchange is $15 per share. On the Italian Stock Exchange is $20 per share. What you can do is purchase it on the New York Stock Exchange, short sell it on the Italian Stock Exchange. In the moment that the market realizes the disalignment between two prices, it could either happen that the price on the New York Stock Exchange increases, the price on the Italian Stock Exchange decreases, or both at the same time. No matter the direction of the change, in the moment that the two prices realign, you have a gain on one side and another gain on the other side with zero risk. A note before proceeding, the futures price differs from that of the underlying during the life of the contract, but coincides perfectly with the price of the underlying at the time of expiration. And the reason why it will be understood only later. This concept must be kept in mind to understand the meaning of a series of formal reasoning that we will do in the next slides and in the next lecture. Suppose now we have bullish expectations on a listed security on which futures contracts are also listed. Given a certain monetary capital, if we buy the security, we must commit the entire counter value of the position. While if we buy the futures, we can use a fraction of that capital that is clearly lower than the equivalent value. From this derives an undoubted advantage of the derivative to conserve liquidity that can be invested elsewhere. If in fact the same position requires, just to say, only 10% of capital thanks to the lever of the futures, the 90% non-employed residual can be invested at the risk-free interest rate, for example, by buying a short-term government bond, thus generating a greater global return on the capital entirely available. Be in fact, for example, 1 year the time horizon of the investment, 5% the rate of a 1-year government bond, 10% the margin required for a futures contract written on a security valued €10 per share, and 1,000 shares the size of the futures contract. Furthermore, let's assume that at the end of the year the share price is 11. The purchase of 1,000 shares involves an outlay of €10,000, and at the end of the year returns €11,000 for a profit of 10%, €1,000 out of 10,000. Assuming for simplicity that the futures price is equal to the price of the underlying security, the purchase of a futures contract involves an initial disbursement of €1,000, the initial margin, not 10,000, as it happens with the purchasing of the stock. And at maturity, it returns a profit of €1,000 because remember that profits and losses on derivatives are calculated on the basis of the value of the contract, not on the value of the initial margin, not on the value of the money deposited. You always have to refer to the value of the contract. So you put in the plate €1,000, but you are exposed for 10,000. So if the price increases €1 per share, you gain 1,000 out of 1,000. In fact, the profit is accrued on the value of the position, not on the capital materially used to obtain it. And since we only use 10% of the capital to obtain this result, we can use the remaining 90% for the purchase of a 1-year government bond, which will return 5% at almost zero risk. So, on 10% of capital, we get 100% profit, while on the remaining 90%, we get 5% profit. The overall profit is then the weighted average of the two, and therefore it is equal to 100% times a 10% of the money available, plus a 5% on the remainder 90% of the capital available. And the final result is 14.5%. It is therefore clear that the lever allows for higher returns. This, among other things, regardless of the market trend. Because if things go well, the price of the underlying increases, buying the stock, we gain 10%, buying the futures and the government bond, we gain 14.5%. But what if things go bad, the price of the underlying goes down? Suppose that during the year the stock loses 10% instead of earning it. In this case, there is a 100% loss on the capital invested in the futures, while on the government bond, the profit is still 5%. So the overall profit is always the weighted average of the two profits, and it's equal to minus 100% weighted on a 10% of the available money, plus 5% weighted on 90% of the available money. And the total result is minus 5.5%. Purchasing the stock, we would lose 10%. Here, we lose only 5.5%. It is therefore clear that the lever allows for higher returns, a reduced loss, in this case, regardless of the market trend. It amplifies profits if things go well, reduces losses if things go wrong. It follows that stock futures must somehow have a cost linked to the interest rate and the duration of the contract. The stock futures price must therefore be equal to the spot price only at maturity. At any other time, it must be greater. This applies to stock futures and partly also to stock index futures. But for other underlying assets, as we shall see, other variables come into play. How is the correct price of a stock futures determined then? We will see it in the next lesson. So far, thank you for your attention.